Hey, folks, and welcome back to the Enemies List. I'm your host, as always, Rick Wilson. I'm delighted to be joined today by Monica Hopkins, who's the executive director of the ACLU of the District of Columbia. She is watching from a very, very close ringside seat a lot of the massive legal challenges that are happening right now as Donald Trump's lawless and scornful of the law administration runs roughshod. Not only is she seeing this up close, in terms of the many of the cases are being handled right there. But there's also now the idea that Trump is going to reshape the District of Columbia in his own image. I will not be shocked if we have casinos on the waterfront any time now. But Monica, I wanted to ask you, starting with sort of the big picture. And look, when I was a Republican consultant, I always had a kind of respect for the ACLU in some of the things you would do in terms of the rule of law and in terms of protecting the fundamental core liberties in the Constitution. I always thought you kind of picked and chose a little bit, but we're going to put that in the rearview mirror for right now. The mission that you guys have right now before you strikes me as twofold. One, you've got a White House and a president who just doesn't care about the courts. He is ignoring at scale a lot of the things that courts have told him and instructed him very clearly to do. You've also got a sort of corrosion of the big law, where a lot of these folks who were once part of pro bono work with the ACLU and other groups to defend people's rights in this country are now backing away. They're like, yes, Mr. President, what would you like us to use our pro bono money for? Talk to me about where you see the state of play right now in the country on the rule of law and how your mission is wrapped up in protecting the rights of American citizens right now.
Well, the ACLU is 105 years old this year. And since our inception, we have been dedicated to protecting and preserving individual liberties and civil rights enshrined in our Constitution and Bill of Rights. And so, we're not veering from that mission in this moment. It becomes even more important in this moment. And I think people are becoming more and more aware about how important the rule of law is. Just a couple of days ago, we were getting sort of very close to what folks now know would be a constitutional crisis if we actually did away with the rule of law. And, in the case where the government was justifying using the Alien Enemies Act, to essentially, without due process, essentially disappear people, and we're arguing the court said no and denied the Trump administration's request to do away with a temporary restraining order that would block them from deporting people without due process and without cause.
Right. That's what struck me is we saw the case of masked, anonymous, unmarked vehicle ICE agents picking up a student at Tufts University this week, basically snatched her off the street. Again, they did not immediately identify themselves as police or as ICE. They jammed her into a van. They ignored a court order that from a judge that said you can't ship her out of the country or anywhere else until I have a hearing. They shipped her to a place in Louisiana. She's been held incommunicado ever since then. My question to you is, this is a bundle of constitutional violations. And, even Antonin Scalia very articulately said, people in this country, even as visitors, have habeas corpus rights, have constitutional protections from this kind of police power. In some ways, this seems like sort of the nightmare scenario you guys have been thinking about for a long time.
Yeah. I would say that, we are an organization that wants to ensure that the government doesn't have this sort of broad overreach of power and essentially just has blatant disregard for the laws in the country, for the courts in this country, for the separation of powers, because, you're not only seeing sort of this ignoring of court orders, but you only have to sort of go over to one of the other powers, the legislative power that we have, right, where you have the Speaker of the House calling, for doing away with courts.
We're just going to get rid of those pesky courts.
Yeah, yeah. So our organization has been around to ensure that, our systems stay in place, the institutions of our democracy stay in place in order to ensure that all of our rights, we are a nonpartisan organization,
right,
all of our rights stay in place.
It strikes me in a kind of worrisome way that if they just choose to ignore the courts and just roll past, there's not much that we can do as American citizens to stop them. Talk to me about where you see what citizens should be doing right now, and what is the ACLU doing right now in that same space? Because they do seem to be trying to push the constitutional crisis to a head with the belief that it's only going to get solved in the courts. So I'm just curious where you see the state of play on that side of it right now, of what do we do about the constitutional crisis beyond going, oh God, there's a constitutional crisis.
Well, I think the way I like to describe the work of the ACLU is sort of like a three-legged stool.
Okay.
And so, on one hand, we have our legal work. We're known for our legal work, and we show up in court. But we also really have this, political, and when I say political, legislative sort of arm. And so we are working as an organization across the country in all of our state-based affiliates in state legislatures. We work at Congress to watch sort of the implementation of these laws and some of the laws that are being introduced in Congress. And then I think what you're pointing toward here is, activating and mobilizing people to actually raise their voices, to show up in district meetings with their representatives, to not sort of sit down and sit out this moment, because that is how power just increases to do things like take away our courts or take away. We have a responsibility to be an active citizenry.
There is a lot of this happening at the state level right now that in some ways I think the noise and the chaos around Donald Trump makes it harder for folks to get a real clear eyeball on a lot of the things in the states. But we're seeing states working very hard to minimize voting rights, to minimize speech rights. And this feels to a lot of people, and I think that correctly, as if it is a broadly coordinated idea, particularly on the right, to push this as far as they can, as fast as they can.
Well, I mean, they wrote a manual, Project 2025. It wasn't hidden.
But I was told that had nothing to do with Donald Trump.
I mean,
nothing at all. He's never heard of it.
If it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, that old saying. And I do think, that yes, it seems very, very fast right now. But if we really look at it, these fights, voting rights, reproductive choice, the gerrymandering that has been going on, this is a long haul sort of plan. What we see in states now may look like a lot like what is going on in Congress. And so, our state affiliates are hard at work trying to ensure that this doesn't happen in states, but you're seeing a lot of the same things. So a lot of the same things around immigration, a lot of the same same sort of voting rights pieces of legislation. And that's what's so important about the ACLU, is that we're not just sort of focused on our national scope, but we have local state-based affiliates that work at all levels, from school board, watching school boards to
Right.
watching state legislatures.
So you being in DC, you have a fairly unique proposition right now in that Donald Trump is now talking about making DC into the District of America, and further reducing the fairly limited amount of autonomy the district. As a longtime former district resident, I've seen this fight evolve in a lot of ways, from statehood to home rule, to all the variations and permutations. But right now, it seems that they are very much determined to take DC out, not only of any sort of local autonomy, but I've even heard a couple of people saying that they want to basically eliminate the voting rights at the federal level of the residents of DC. Talk to me about where that whole shenanigan is in play right now, and what you guys are doing to respond to that threat.
Yeah. So for your listeners who don't know, district residents only had the right to vote for president as of 1968, which is astounding, to have hundreds of thousands of people living in the District of Columbia and not be able to vote for president. And then in 1973, because Congress finally decided we don't want to run the District of Columbia, which at this point is larger than a couple of states. They said, look, we're going to let the District of Columbia govern themselves, make their own laws, raise their own taxes, have their own budget, but we don't want to let go completely. And so, to date, over the last couple of decades, we have had a congressional review period on our laws, which a lot of people probably know about the disapproval resolutions. And then also the big thing for us, which hasn't happened in the last couple of decades, is that the federal government treated DC as an agency in the continuing resolution. Thereby stripping about $1 billion from our existing budget that we've spent almost 6 months of already. And that's DC taxpayer money. It will save the government no money.
Exactly. It's one of those classic things like, oh, we're being fiscal, but it's already done. It's gone.
Yeah. Well, no,
and it's gone.
Even more than that, it's not that it's gone. I mean, it is gone, but it's DC taxpayer money. It's not part of the federal budget. So, but I do think that what you're talking about is even sort of taking DC even farther back and stripping us, the desire of the Trump administration to strip us of this limited self-governance and take over. We just saw an executive order, come out about making DC safe and beautiful. And I think the 700,000 residents of DC would think that our city is safe and beautiful.
I have a brief context story for you. When I got to George Washington University in 1983, we get this incoming student briefing. They're like, never, ever, ever, ever walk anywhere east of 16th Street. You will be instantly murdered. Okay. And it was, the crime was very bad in that era. The city was pretty rough around the edges in that era. It's as if he hasn't been to DC in the last 25 years or more, because now the places that were once these rough, pretty tough neighborhoods are now all gentrified, almost out to PG County at this point. The city is booming economically, and the idea he's going to make it be, what, more gold leaf casinos, strip clubs? What are you looking for, Donald? And it just struck me. It did strike me as like a really profound misreading of what the city is today. Are there still a few rough neighborhoods in southeast? Maybe. but that's a global issue.
Right. I think that's the point is like
Yeah.
we DC as a place is, where people reside in our communities and have children who go to
Hmm.
schools and shops. I mean, we are like any other state that has a metropolitan sort of
That's right.
place, right? Like, yes, we have crime. There's nowhere in this country that you have
Every single
zero
city in this
crime,
country has crime.
right? And we, we do a fairly good job of passing laws and attending to our own sort of crime and governing
Hmm.
ourselves, addressing the needs of our city and the residents of our city.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, the cherry blossoms are blooming these days and people
Right.
are out and it is a beautiful city. But we're like any other state.
Yeah.
There are issues, and that's why we have a governing body that is elected by the residents of DC to address the concerns and the needs of its residents.
Yeah. As I pointed out to somebody the other day, the worst crime spree in DC that I can recall was January 6th,
Yeah.
by a pretty high order of magnitude in my lifetime. And it is a city that has a character about it that I think gets lost sometimes in the sort of cliche about, oh, it's DC, it's all politics, it's all corruption. It's an amazing city.
Yeah.
It has an amazing culture. It has great music, great food, great restaurants, and it's beautiful. It is a beautiful town. And I think that kind of gets lost. And I mean, I know folks are like, now I get back to politics, Wilson, but it is a beautiful city. And people who have not been to Washington, you really, really, really should go and spend some time there, because you will be stunned at 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 how gorgeous it is. And it's a pretty hospitable city too. I mean,
And I
it is
would
a
I would say get
yeah,
off the mall, right?
a
Like
100%.
Washington is not just the mall and the monuments. Really get
That's right.
into the neighborhoods and
Hmm.
see what the city has to offer. Because I do think that's where you see, you can go get a half smoke and some mumbo
Absolutely.
sauce and listen to some go go and
Exactly.
yeah.
Y'all go-go is Washington D.C.'s sort of um, local music tradition, and I recommend it. No, but I do think, and we'll get back to the darkness. Um, I do think that there's a lot about what they're doing right now in this administration that really wants to reduce cities like Washington into fiefdoms, into parts of their operation, and to sort of have a broader sense of federal control of everything, which doesn't strike me as particularly conservative in any regard. And I think DC is sort of a test case right now. Do you guys have any allies in Congress beyond, the folks, the immediately proximate folks to Washington? Because it strikes me you may need some more defenders in the coming months and years.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that what we saw around the continuing resolution,
Hmm.
while while the hope would have been to just say no to the continuing resolution for the sake
Right.
of the residents of the District of Columbia, what we did see is the Senate and in its totality, sort of stand up and say, okay, this piece about DC, we are going to send this back over to the House and
Right.
and ask the House to reinstate DC.
Hmm.
And we just saw Trump come out with a tweet today that
Hmm.
essentially said, the House should take up this bill to reinstate DC's budget and the funds. So, it's always tricky with the
Sure.
ACLU to say who
Sure.
who your allies are. Sometimes it's on the issue,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
that was a
Hmm.
pretty clear message from the Senate standing up for DC in this
I
in
think
this
so too.
moment.
I think so too. And it is going to be a city where the test cases are tempting to hold them there for the Trump administration because they view it as a much more captive audience in terms of budget and rights and everything else than places farther afield.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those things, though, that they can do it to DC, right? Like there is a lot of federal power, and it's sort of a warning. It's like DC is like the canary in the coal mine. They can do it to DC. They can, start reaching out to other places in other states, and that's what we see in other states in the state legislatures.
As somebody in DC, do you find that ironic Trump is more eager to extend statehood to Canada and Greenland than to the district?
I mean, I think we'd be happy being the 52nd, but no one's taking the 51st. So it is really ironic that, he wouldn't want to actually enfranchise the very people that sort of
700,000 Americans versus 5,700 or 57,000 Greenlanders.
Right.
It's kind of a ridiculous thing. Well, Monica, tell us where folks can reach out to you online or the DC ACLU.
Yeah, so you can reach out to the ACLU of DC at acludc.org. We have lots of resources on our website and the National ACLU at aclu.org. And we also encourage people to go and find out information about DC statehood and how we operate at dcstatehoodnow.org.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Monica, for coming on the show today. We really appreciate you. We look forward to talking to you again soon.
Great. Thanks so much, Rick.
Thanks again. Greenland doesn't want to be an American state. I know that this seems like a ridiculous thing to have to tell you. But Greenland does not want to be an American state. They are Danish. They are largely independent in the microscopic Danish empire, largely self-governing. And interestingly, we just did a show just now about DC's governance. If you want to make more states, Puerto Rico or DC would jump up right now. But they don't care about that. Somewhere in the weirdo red pill universe, they've convinced Trump that taking over Canada and Greenland and maybe Panama and God knows where else, in some weird way, makes America stronger and safer. This is almost definitionally insane. We have a base in Greenland. We have a great relationship with the Danes, or we did have a great relationship with the Danes. If you wanted to do mineral deals in Greenland, you could. If you want to do oil and gas deals in Greenland, I guess you could make that work if they thought there were a sufficient baseline for it. Strategically, we could already exercise power. Why? We were allied with the most significant neighbor we could have had, Canada. Arctic power could deploy through Canada. It could also deploy through Alaska. It could also deploy through our base at Pacific in Greenland, which we've had a perfectly cordial relationship with for many years. It used to be called Thule. It's the coldest fucking place you've ever been. How do I know? I know. But the idea that J.D. Vance and his wife, and then Mike Waltz, that hapless goon, were going to go up there and Bigfoot around this tiny, tiny, tiny little population. The town of Nuuk, most people in Greenland live within like a 100-mile radius of Nuuk. They went and tried to set up a sort of show and tell thing here. And the folks of Greenland correctly rejected them in every way. They closed every door, literally closed doors to them. America is a nation that is well past this idea that we're going to go and exercise some sort of divine right and take a lot more territory. We're a big country. Yeah, Alaska, we're a huge goddamn country. The idea we need Greenland is absurd. The idea that J.D. Vance is somehow point man on Greenland makes it almost comically absurd. But the people around Trump who are feeding this weird fantasy that Canada is our enemy, Greenland is ours to conquer, and that America's destiny is to whack the world up into three pieces where Russia controls Europe, China controls Asia, and we control North and South America. It's not only immature and weird, it's not only counterproductive to America in the world as the world really is, but it goes to show you, it really tells you a lot about how credulous and dumb Donald Trump really is. Nothing about the Greenland shenanigans is serious, but it does put the people behind it on the enemies list. We'll see you next time.